Speech-language pathologist and key creative coach Cat Beck was diagnosed in adulthood with autism and ADHD. Join us as Cat shares her wisdom and dedication supporting neurodivergent youth today. Stay tuned. It's time for Key Talks. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Key Talks. We are so glad you're tuning in, listening in, however you're in with us today. My name is Deanna Halls, and I'm Key Creative's Communications Director and co-host with the one in pink across the table, Paula Audrey Rivera, Key Creative's Chief Operating Officer, also a social worker.
Yes.
Yes.
That's me.
To my left on the table is Michael Schwake, our Chief Technical Officer, the setter-upper of all these microphones,
Setter-upper.
cameras, lights that are bringing Key Talks to you and just monitoring our levels so that we all sound
Decent.
decent in your cars and your computers, what have you.
So we don't explode your ears
Yeah.
with my loud voice.
Make sure when Paula has a really loud chuckle that you guys don't go, ah.
Yeah.
No, it's
Why
not
would
fair.
they do that? Yeah,
No.
that's not fair.
That's not.
No, it's true.
You're very expressive
Yes,
in your
true.
joyous laughter.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, and if you don't know who we are, Key Creative, we are a pediatric rehab med practice here in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. We work with youth of all ages and abilities. So for Alberta specifically, there's a lot of clients that come to us through the FSCD program. So to get into that program, generally there's a diagnosis that could be autism spectrum disorder, could be OCD, ADHD. Sometimes there's traumatic brain injury that comes into our practice. We have all sorts of different circumstances from all different walks of life. And we're here to help share some of those experiences and expertise from our amazing team.
Yeah.
Now, today's episode is going to be our colleague Cat Beck, speech-language pathologist at Key Creative. And I won't go into any definitions just yet, but today's episode is on AuDHD, which is a portmanteau term for autism and ADHD combined. And I won't go any further than that until we actually have Kat here. So Kat, please come on out.
Woo!
Yay!
Where do they come from?
The secret room.
Yeah.
I've got my headset on here.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Awesome.
Hi.
Hello.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yay.
Just gonna fiddle around here. Probably take my sweater off
Yes,
again.
get comfy, cozy as you can.
Thank you. Thank you. Alrighty.
Yeah, so
Thanks.
I had a very brief intro of you as speech-language pathologist at Key Creative, but let's hear it from Kat herself. Where does it all begin?
Where does it all begin? So I, like Deanna said, I'm a speech language pathologist here with Key Creative. I am also AuDHD, meaning both autistic and ADHD. So I know we were talking a little bit just before this started about how that's not necessarily a term that everyone's super familiar with, and there's a lot of overlap between autism and ADHD. And I think what people often, when I disclose this, they expect to see like the extreme of autism and the extreme of ADHD both combined. And oftentimes that's not really how ADHD and autism presents in an individual. Aspects or traits of the autism can mask aspects or traits of the ADHD, and aspects of the ADHD can mask some of the autistic traits. So on the outside, I think I can present very neurotypical. I have that sort of privilege there. But internally, there's kind of always this battle going on. People talk about like there are two wolves inside of you or whatever. And I very much feel that with myself. It's like I definitely benefit from having a lot of structure, having like knowing a plan, having a schedule laid out, like knowing exactly what I'm going to do. And then the ADHD part of me is like, no, like you can't do that. That's so boring. That's so rigid. Like I feel so confined. And so it's like always trying to balance out, where I'm at on a given day. And it's like a delicate balancing dancing act sometimes.
Kind of sounds like
Yeah.
a bit of a tug of war. Would that be an accurate, like as you're describing that, I'm kind of seeing this like tugging back and
Yes,
forth and then finding the balance
very
in your
much
day or at the
so.
beginning of your day or throughout your day to sort of
Hmm.
like find where you need to be.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah. And so there are
interesting.
days where it's like, I need to have everything planned out. I need to know what I'm doing because I can't like think on the spot that day. Like I just
Mm,
feel so paralyzed.
mm-hmm,
And there are days where it's like, I look at my calendar and it's full and it's like, I can't do any of this. I want to do this. And I'm lucky to have a place where I can manage a lot of that pretty well, which is nice, but it gets
mm-hmm,
tricky sometimes for sure.
mm-hmm,
Yeah.
Yeah.
mm-hmm.
Yeah, and like now I'm trying to think of like what your childhood was like. Like
Mm.
when would you say like any grown-ups in your life started to recognize that you were neurodivergent in some way or were like seeking a diagnosis like from how early would you say you started to
Ooh.
have that self-awareness?
Yeah.
So I am very late diagnosed, and I think
Mm-hmm,
that's very common for a lot of millennial women,
Yes.
mm-hmm,
especially because a lot of our traits were just missed. Because like I was very academically adept because very good at pattern recognition. So I always tested really well, all of these things. So no one was worried about me academically, which
mm-hmm,
meant no one thought anything was wrong.
mm-hmm,
In spite of the fact that I would have these meltdowns or breakdowns, these panic attacks, especially around like hanging out with my friends.
mm-hmm.
I'd have these plans to hang out with them, and then day of would happen, and I would pull out. I'd be like, no, I can't do this. I'd cry in my bedroom, and I got this reputation of being really flaky as a result,
Mm,
which honestly kind of sucked.
for sure. Yeah, yeah.
um, but I would say I was very late diagnosed, like I said. Like I wasn't diagnosed until I was 30.
Mm-hmm.
And it's still not really on my parents' radar.
Mm,
It kind of is now. I think they understand a bit more. Um, so what happens often with neurodivergent folk is their parents are often neurodivergent, whether they know it or not.
mm,
So a lot of things that my parents thought were like, oh, well, that's just typical because that's how I was.
mm-hmm.
So they didn't see a need. They didn't see that as something that was like diagnosable. They just thought like,
Like I'm not diagnosed, so my typical is your typical, and I've
exactly.
clearly survived until my 60s like this
Yes.
and been able to get along in society and not have this kind of stigma. And so why are you having this problem, my child? Like is that the kind
Exactly,
of thing?
exactly. So
Yeah.
it was never
Mm,
really on the radar, but as I started to learn more about autism and ADHD, I really started to question things, and I started to see it more, especially in my father.
mm,
And what's interesting to note just about that, if we can go down a little bit of a rabbit hole,
totally.
Yes,
Yeah.
any rabbit holes you want. Hop in.
Yes.
just in terms of like figuring out like what people see and what is like um seeing it as a disability versus not. My dad demonstrates, I think, a lot of autistic traits, a lot of very ADHD traits as well. But being a cis white man in this society, it is much more acceptable for him to be loud and in your face. It's much more
Mm,
acceptable for him to interrupt and for him to
mm,
just say like, no, I don't think we should do it. I think we should do it this way, and people will listen to him. Um, so I feel like I take it after my dad quite a bit, and that's harmed me in other ways
yeah.
just because of how society is structured with me
Mm-hmm.
as a woman.
Mm-hmm.
I have been extricated from friend groups because I've been too loud or my tone has been misread.
Mm,
I've been told a lot like, like you're too much.
mm, mm-hmm.
Whereas, like, I don't see that being said about men as much,
Mm-hmm.
that men are too much. Like,
Mm-hmm.
they're just big and they have this big personality. They can say and do
Mm,
what they want, but women aren't allowed to be big. Women
mm,
aren't allowed to have big personalities.
yeah.
Us
And
male neurodivergents, yeah, we're afforded a bit of privilege on that. Like it still happens at a point, but
mhm,
the thing is it's something that because of certain societal expectations and stuff like that, where people they'll there's an air of permissibility and like but that's something that I think has been the problem with for diagnoses for women is because you know you end up having this lens that's so kind of like focused on those things, and behaving versus behaviors and stuff like that, and it ends up being really difficult to kind of find your place, and for people who have that.
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Um, so something when I was little that I think my parents were slightly more concerned about was I was very, very quiet, very, very like so shy, like
Mm.
would not talk to anybody. And growing up again, learning more about things through the schooling that I chose to do, I really feel like my education path, I like kind of found things that were like of interest to me and also almost filled in some of my gaps in my skills through my own education.
Mm.
So
Wow.
like went to speech path school, learned more about selective mutism. Like that's what was going on with me when I was little. That's why it was so hard to talk. I was petrified. I could not get those words out. I had like my one best friend. Her name is Katie.
Mm.
And I would talk basically through her. And
Oh.
to this day, if I see her and her mom might like give me a little jab and poke fun at me for when I was at their table when I was little. Like it was, I couldn't ask for like something that was just across the table. I would whisper to Katie,
Oh.
and then she would either pass me something or ask her family to pass it
Yeah.
to me.
Yeah.
And yeah, I was like tied at the hip with her. And I
Mm.
think that's very characteristic as well of a lot of neurodivergent experiences. You have, I don't know if it's the same for you, for instance, Mike, but having like that favorite person is really important for being
Yeah.
able to build a relationship and build trust
Yeah.
and to be able to like start to explore who you are and what
Yeah.
you want. Because absent of that, like I was just paralyzed and shy and kind of like in my own little world. And I was like too afraid and didn't know how to really reach out to other people.
Yeah.
Um,
It
uh,
it sounds like she was like when you're describing all that, the word that's coming to my mind is like safety. Like she helped you to feel safe. And yeah, total shout out to her and those friendships that are create a space for us to feel safe
yeah.
and to explore who we are.
Hmm.
For
I,
that, I'm
I
not an
Awesome.
OT myself, but it almost sounds like that was like a co-regulation tool in a way,
Absolutely.
or an accommodation, right? We
Mhm.
love those.
We do love those.
well, and like those persons are like just kind of quintessential to giving yourself that it really is that coping strategy for you, right? Like I think for me, I definitely had the people that I latched onto, but because of like the lack of object permanence in certain elements of things, I hopped all over the place, because that's for me being more ADHD side of things. It's like really it required people who kind of understood my my special nature, and um in that sense, not so much tolerate it, but had an air of understanding of that. And like, there's all those subtle things where, the things where, like with ADHD, oh, you're like, you're so focused but then not lazy, or all those things where the things that people aren't necessarily, we're learning now to better advocate for everyone on these things. But the things that these would just be things that people could like really see your worth beyond just a label or who you are at that point, and understand, okay, that's Mike, that's
Mm.
Kat, right?
Hmm.
And almost be that secondary advocate, because like, especially like I was very fortunate of having a very young diagnosis, so self-advocacy was a big thing for me growing up. So like, in terms of different things, it made it for a bit of a different experience, and that can be for maybe a conversation for another
Hmm.
show. But it's really having those people who self-advocate for you. And again, like, probably the like with how you are and what you're speaking about with your family and having friends who are there, like their advocacy is like, they at least normalized the experience because of their own experience, whether they knew it or not. But those things that do, because the whole, the using the normal as the pejorative and whatnot, it's such a terrible thing for persons who are dealing with disability. But really creating a stability is maybe the better word so
Yeah.
so that so if it's that one friend or those multiple friends, that family that really become that support network. Yeah.
Yeah. I would always say I've always had one person that I'll gravitate towards. Like I've always had a favorite person in
Mm.
my life. Um, and I also want to acknowledge like how that can also be very difficult for that
Mm.
person.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like it's not just like they're my favorite person and we're best buddies and it's happy go lucky all the time. Like that is the person that will see me at my absolute worst. That
Mm.
is the person that will see me once I'm all put together for work. I can hold it all together. I can do everything, but they're the ones that will see me absolutely crash and fall apart
Mm.
when I can't
Mhm.
do it anymore.
Mhm.
And that's honestly a lot more frequent than you might think.
Mhm. Mhm.
And that's not to say that I'm not okay, because I am very much okay now and I'm doing a lot better. It's a constant journey.
Mhm.
But I don't want to give this illusion
Mhm.
that like, oh, I got this diagnosis and now everything's okay and I'm fine. Because it is a disability. And
Mm.
I do have a lot of support in my home life from my
Mhm.
favorite person, which is amazing.
Mhm.
But like, I don't go to the grocery store because it's so overwhelming. There are the lights, the choices, the number of people there, the beeping, and everything from the checkouts. The fact that so many times, like sometimes, like people just come up and talk to me, and I'm like, I don't know how to
Mm.
deal. Like I just don't know what to do. And then when
Stop.
yeah, and when
Don't
they came out with
approach.
the self-checkout,
Yeah.
initially, I was like, "Oh, amazing. I don't have to,
Yeah.
like, deal with
Yes.
a person." But then the self-checkout always breaks,
Oh my
and then I have to
gosh.
talk
Don't
to
even.
somebody anyway.
Don't
It's
even get
like
me going on
You know
self-checkouts.
what? I feel like I can talk about this as an
I mean,
accommodation too, because like I will go to Dollarama all the time with my husband, and we learned that when you do the bag first, like the digital
mm.
scale has kind of a heart attack and it breaks down, and that's why you always have
Oh.
to ask somebody to like clear it for you. But if you just put like scan your stuff and put it there first, and then you bag when you've done your
Done your
transaction,
stuff.
it doesn't have that heart attack anymore. So we've been able to not have that
I
confusion with the
love it.
scale breaking and having to talk to a person.
That's
Key
great.
tip.
I'm gonna have to
Yeah.
try that the
Key
next time I
tip. Key
happen
tip.
to be in a store.
Accommodation.
Key
Like there's
Dollarama tip.
strategies at the self checkouts.
Um,
Yeah,
I wonder if is it
Yeah.
okay if we just back up a little bit? And I
Yeah.
absolutely.
wonder if it's appropriate to just ask us to define. Like,
Mm.
I mean,
Yeah.
we're kind of assuming, but not everyone is maybe versed in ADHD or even
Mm.
autism, right? So I'm wondering from if you wouldn't mind sharing just like the basic definition of each.
Yeah,
Yeah,
sure.
is that okay?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
they're both characterized as neurological differences or disorders in the DSM. I would characterize autism like it's a disability in terms of how our society is structured right now, because it's hard
Mm,
to function right now in the society as someone who is autistic. But really,
mm.
autism is a neurotype. So
Okay.
it's a difference in your brain structure
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to like a neurotypical brain.
Mm-hmm.
And there's all sorts of research out there about what's different about the autistic brain and what's not. And none of it is super conclusive at the
Okay.
moment. But
Yeah.
really, what it comes down to is it's characterized by social communication differences. So that could look like um, differences in ability to use verbal speech or not. That is not my journey. I'm obviously I can speak. I have
Very well. You
lots
speak
of
very well.
I have many words.
I sincerely meant that as like a compliment.
um,
I like your many words.
it's also characterized by sensory differences
Mhm.
and oftentimes very spiky emotional regulation profiles. And something that we like to talk about in our practice is the autistic brain, the autistic person is usually taking in a lot more sensory information than the average
Mm.
person. It's
Mhm.
harder to filter out anything in the background.
Mhm.
So it's more likely that you're going to be overwhelmed. So think about like if you've
Yeah.
ever had like a really busy, hectic day at work and you're thinking about all these bits that you have to coordinate, and oh my God, the sink is dripping or the fire alarm's going off, like it's too much. It's kind of like that, but like all the time.
All the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then ADHD
Mhm.
is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder.
Mhm.
And many people are probably familiar with the stereotype of the very hyper little boy that can't sit down, maybe a little motor mouth, things like that. Um, and there are kind of three different types of ADHD. You have the inattentive type, you have the like kind of more compulsive or hyperactive type, and you have the combined type. And the reality is, most people are probably a mix of both, um, which is my presentation as well. But you can tend towards the inattentive or the hyperactive kind of side of things, depending on where you're at in terms of your regulation. I would say that like my hyperactivity and everything was very well managed when I was a child
Mm.
because I was an autistic sensory vestibular sensory seeker. I loved swinging, I loved balancing. I
Mm.
was walking on balance beams all the time. So my
Mm.
parents put me in gymnastics.
Mm-hmm.
So I was in gymnastics probably 18 hours a week.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Hmm.
I heard that they're like putting kids in for like over 20 hours now, but that's pretty
Yeah.
darn close. Holy moly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would go to school and then I would leave school half an hour early to make it to gymnastics and I would train for 4 hours and I'd come home
Wow.
almost every day of the week. Yeah.
My
One
goodness. Wow.
one of the common strategies when kids are basically, families are told that your child is neurodivergent is they recommend an excess of programming
Mm.
so that you can
Oh.
basically, make sure that the brain is kind of stimulated and given
Yeah,
structure.
but that wasn't
Yeah.
your case. That was just
That
they
was
didn't.
that
She
was
wasn't
yeah.
diagnosed at that
Nope.
point,
But
or acknowledged,
but
or aware, right? But just if I, but
yeah.
so I think it's just gymnastics in that way is that type of sport.
Mhm.
However, to your point, I understand
It's
that.
it's like a
Yeah.
very appropriate almost like
Yes.
strategy
Yeah.
in terms of it whether you didn't know
Yep.
or
Huh.
it's very common because it gives those opportunities, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, and the structure of that was great again.
Yeah.
But I would say like I did end up eventually struggling very socially
Mhm.
in the gymnastics aspect of things. And I think, did you have a question that you were going to lead to? Because I could go down another rabbit hole here.
Well, you can keep going. Yeah.
I feel like I got off tangent from your.
Okay.
I'll jump
Well,
into
I
your original
asked that.
question.
So I think you answered like like talking about autism, talking about ADHD. I mean, I do have another question,
Mm.
or I want to throw something in there. Is highly sensitive people. I just listened to a podcast on that, and so it's sort of another piece of understanding people and sensitivities. And I don't know if we want to bring that in, but I'm curious about maybe your thoughts on that, or yeah.
I think this could actually tie in a little bit to
'Kay.
the rabbit hole I was going to go
Sure,
down because I was
yeah.
going to say things for me as a child. Like I said, I just happened to have a lot of things in place that seemed to just work for me. I had
Mhm.
my favorite person. Was I really shy? Yeah, but like I had my favorite person, so I was kind of happy.
Mhm.
But social situations get more complex as you get older.
Mhm.
So my favorite person wasn't necessarily always just with me. She
Yeah.
wanted to have other friends.
Yeah, yeah.
And that was really hard.
Mm.
And also, like you start thinking about as you get older, hormones
Yeah.
start getting coming into the picture, and puberty was huge. That was really really hard for me.
Mm.
And I think ever since puberty is when I really did start to struggle even more. And
In what way? Can I ask in what way?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So as soon as I kind of like, hit puberty, I was just so much more dysregulated
Mm.
all of the time.
Mhm.
I found it so much harder to go out and be social. My anxiety spiked through the roof. I found it a lot more difficult to, I just like, I felt so uncomfortable in my body is like
Mm.
the best way to put it. Um, and I was constantly just so tired, like
Mm.
so tired. I felt like I was fighting through like I always equate it to like it's like I was moving through molasses and it's like my brain was just so foggy all the time.
Mm.
And turns out like part of my diagnostic process and actually I fought for this for a couple years was I have PMDD. Which is premenstrual dysphoric disorder. So it's
Mhm.
basically, if you think about the classic symptoms of PMS,
Mhm.
it's like that on like a 10 out of 10 scale. And I think to me, like I got the PMDD diagnosis before I got my AuDHD
Mhm.
diagnoses. And it the ADHD and autism diagnosis made that make a lot of sense to me in a weird way
Okay.
because, like, if I am so sensitive to so many things around me, it makes sense that my body would be incredibly sensitive
Yeah.
to fluctuations in hormones.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, so yeah, like it was like 2 weeks out of every month, I was feeling just completely depressed, completely unable to function, completely emotionally dysregulated. Like the smallest things would just, I couldn't let them go.
Mm.
Um, and so, yeah, being able to, again, have the privilege to be able to track that and
Yeah.
get the treatment for that was huge. But yeah, no, puberty hit me like a truck, I would say. And it
Yeah.
changed me in a lot of ways. And I'm
Yeah.
still only now starting to find myself
Yeah,
again.
like like find some healing or yeah.
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 Yeah. Because
That
I would
sounds
say
intense.
I lost a lot of my time to
Mm.
just that. Um, Not to say that I haven't pursued lots of different hobbies and interests because I have, but like
Yeah.
I really like just focused on my academics a lot and I pushed a lot of the social stuff aside. And while I did have friends and stuff, sort of like I was always kind of like I had my partner usually was my favorite
Mhm.
person and I would do social activities through them and
Mhm. Do you think it could have been different if you had a diagnosis earlier? Like, do you think it could have how could it have been different?
I think it would have been a lot different in the sense that it would have come with a lot more understanding
Mhm.
and compassion, I think, from my family.
Mhm.
Um, the family piece has been a big struggle for me. Like my parents never really understood what was going on with me. Um, and like I don't think I was never like a bad kid. Like I
Mhm.
never acted out, never did anything bad. But I think it's like my parents often saw like I think they were parenting from like how they were parented, right?
Mhm.
So I don't know if I'll give an example of something that happened. I don't know if it's like too traumatic to share or something.
I think it's okay.
It's okay?
Yeah. If
Okay.
as long as you're comfortable, Kat. Yeah. Then
Yeah. So I mean it's a difficult thing to share, but like for example, high school hits. I had done like advanced math and everything in junior high. So I was doing grade 11 and 12 math in grade 10
mm.
in the IB program.
Oh,
Um
same, huh?
Same,
IB.
same, same,
IB.
same, same.
IB.
None here.
Same. Yep.
I was in grade 10, I was doing grade 8. Just kidding.
Yeah. So it was a lot of pressure. And then that transition to high school was hard because, like, I'm not
Mhm.
with the same friends. I'm in a different group. And now I'm in a classroom with older kids who I really
Yes.
don't know.
Mm.
I remember, like, it was October something. I just did my like math 20 midterm. And I got an 84 on it and I bawled. I cried.
Mm.
'Cause I didn't think it was good enough. A lot of like I am very much a perfectionist, and I think that stems from the autism quite a bit. Like things have to be like a certain way, and I have to like I just want to do well. So I got this 84, and it's not like my parents ever pushed me to get good grades. Like they were never like you have to study, you have to do this. Like I put that on myself.
Mhm.
But the fact that I didn't want to show my parents my report card, that just made my dad furious.
Mm.
Oh.
And that was never something that, like, I had done before, I'd never hidden it before. Um, so I think he didn't know how to react, and again, looking back on this with the lens of, I think my dad is autistic and
Mhm.
probably struggles with emotional regulation as well, it's
Mhm.
given me a bit more perspective. But, rather than sit down and chat with me about, like, "Why was this hard for you?" It was met with anger, it was met with completely tearing apart my room just to, like, show me a lesson,
Mhm.
and some physical aggression too. And so that, like, I feel like if my dad or if I or if any of us had had a diagnosis, I feel like it really would have put some perspective onto some of those things and opened up more ability to have conversations about some of these struggles and why things were hard, as opposed to just always reacting. It was a
Yeah.
very reactive household, I would say.
Mhm.
So,
Oh, thank you for sharing that, Kat.
mhm.
That sounds hard.
Mm,
And I can now, it helps me also understand so much about the importance and value of having a diagnosis, right? To just give us all more insight and understanding, but empathy, like empathy for each other and then being able to respond
Yeah.
versus like
yeah,
reacting to things because it's reacting just becomes so emotional and unfortunately hurtful,
yeah,
right?
Yeah. So
yeah.
this like in my head right now, and I know it's just like an unfortunate consequence of the society that we're in right now is where diagnosis can lead to better access,
Mm,
right? So if we have that diagnosis, it can lead to better access of like even our own team right now here in present day, or having that trained professional who knows what's going on with brains and hormones during that time of life, and if they need the a pharmaceutical accommodation, something more in the environment. Whereas if you don't, and then what do you have if you don't? You kind of have like the rest of society's different stereotypes and things to lean back on of like, oh, girls are just sensitive. It's a sensitive time. You know what you need? You need 10 hours of sleep and maybe some evening primrose oil. There you go. Off you go,
mm,
right? And that's
mhm,
what that do,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And yeah, like I
mhm,
said, I fought for years for that PMDD diagnosis because like I'm like, this isn't right. Like this can't be what life is.
mhm,
Um, and I just think it's so funny because like I know so many men who've like walked into like whatever and I have this or that and they get thrown like this arsenal of like meds and treatments or whatever. And I had to document all of my symptoms daily for 6 months for them to even consider taking me seriously. And even then, they questioned me. And as someone with ADHD and who's also trying to, either go to grad school or then transition into a new career, trying to do that just daily tracking on its own
mm.
was so much work.
Yes, yeah,
It
yeah.
was a lot. And it was also pretty frustrating that they would really only take me seriously when I highlighted how it was impacting my ability to work
Mm,
as
My
opposed to
ability
my
to contribute
yeah, as opposed to like
and be productive and
yeah,
make a living and be independent and satisfy the medical model, right?
exactly, because I feel
Yeah.
like so often it was like, "Oh, well, like, you're kind of in pain and you're emotional," and what like, that's just being a woman.
mm.
And one
Like, you don't need to treat that, that's just your life. I'm like,
Yeah,
"Can it not be?"
yeah,
And it
yeah,
turns out it can not be.
yeah.
and
So
with adult diagnoses, I've coached fellow friends who've gone through the adult diagnosis, the reluctance because they're like, you've made it this far
Mm,
to give you the accommodation of a medicine or something like that. It's like, you know, not everyone can be privileged to go unmedicated. Like that,
mhm,
they yes, you have strategies that got you this far, but the reason you're seeking that diagnosis, that label, is because it's not working in the way that people expect.
yeah,
And so like there's the label that is liberating, but then it's like, how are we going to deal with this? And so often with doctors, they don't want to do that because again, like I can understand not wanting to create, pharmaceutical pharmaceutical mispronounce it.
pharmaceutical. No, I
No,
think
am
you
I
you
am I
said
got
it
it.
saying
correct.
okay?
Yeah,
You
yeah.
got
Yeah,
it.
my brain is like
You're
three
good.
times checking it out. Yeah, with pharmaceuticals, not wanting to like essentially, over prescribe and stuff like that because there has been scrutiny on the medical community. But the thing is when it's something that literally is impacting so much of your productivity, your mental well-being, not getting that, and then on top of having all the other challenges of even just getting the diagnosis, they're just compounding it when they don't even realize it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And something I like to even remind some of the parents that I work with too, as they realize sometimes that they're also neurodivergent as we start working with their kids. Like,
Mhm,
yes, like you were saying, Mike, like you can have these strategies that have gotten you X far, but life isn't always the same. And sometimes the demands that you have on you, or the expectations placed on you, or the work that you have to do is just more than it was before. So say you were doing just fine, all of a sudden you have a kid. Well, now you have this whole other human to take care of in
Mhm.
addition to yourself. So maybe you're finding that you're struggling more and some of those symptoms are coming out a little more frequently. Um, that doesn't mean that it wasn't there before, that you didn't struggle
Mm.
before. It just means you are struggling more now, and that's okay. That makes sense.
Mhm.
And yeah, that means I don't like, yes, you didn't need medication before, you do now. Or you could benefit from it now. Like that's okay.
Mhm.
I think
Mm.
something else we need to talk about when in terms of like the pharmaceutical reliance is like how many ADHDers or neurodivergent folks will self-medicate in
Mm.
absence of those pharmaceutical interventions.
Oh,
Yeah,
interesting.
can you give
So
me some
much
more?
caffeine.
Okay, so yeah, so caffeine, that is an example. Is there anything else
Caffeine is
that?
a huge one.
Yeah.
Just in general, substance abuse or
Oh,
addictions, addictive behaviors, much more common in the
yes.
neurodivergent community.
Yeah.
Because either you're seeking that like dopamine fix or you're seeking
Mhm.
something that's going to help just like settle you for a time. Like
Mhm.
you are seeking that self-medication.
Mhm.
I've been fortunate not to really struggle with substance abuse myself, although I know like I will on occasion, like marijuana is legal now. Like
Mhm.
that's something that a lot of folks will use to help kind of
Mhm.
disconnect. Like
Mhm.
it helps to kind of calm everything in the brain.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that can be helpful for some people as well.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Mhm. Oh,
But
interesting.
yeah, I think it's interesting if we are thinking about avoiding the pharmaceutical reliance. I feel like the conversation we're not having is what are then people doing
Yeah.
Mhm.
to self medicate?
Mhm.
Yeah, those things, like the things that the unhealthy behaviors and stuff like that. Like I can think of, because like for me, my cope has always been to, for the most part, avoid, like, yes, I've drank and and whatnot, and but the thing is those things that are those heavy vices. I've always had like an internal like dialogue that maintains myself so that I don't fall down those things, and like like I have friends who have challenges with those things, whether they're neurodivergent or not, and whatever things that they are dealing with. The reality is like for me, the only thing that was able to do was create like essentially a strategy that has prevented me from having those addictions. Except on the other side of it, video game addiction, Pokemon Go, and
World of Warcraft.
yeah. Uh,
Yeah, and I think that's it. Maybe I don't know if it's. I think it's important to note, since we are on that topic, that addiction has a broad spectrum, right? Like
mhm.
it's not just those typical alcoholism or drug addiction. Like it can be, like you said, it
Yeah.
could be a Pokemon addiction, or
Yep.
like Gabor Mate talks about record, consumption addiction, and so that it does have a broad spectrum of what that can look like, right?
Those little things that give you those dopamine
Yeah,
hits in
Yeah,
dopamine
some
the
way.
chasing.
dopamine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It could
Yeah.
be designer bags one day. It could
Yes.
be
Just shopping.
yoga mats
Mhm.
and clothes and like all the different little barbells, like just gym stuff,
Yeah, looking for
or
that.
or it's shoes, or it's gonna be like, vacation packages to a
Mhm.
specific country.
And
Exactly. Yeah.
I
dopamine, it's a hell of a drug.
Do we know how
Yeah.
Deanna's getting her dopamine fix?
I don't know. I just like
No,
I just think like my first year or so of working for Key and meeting Coach Sam Patharana, our clinical director,
Mhm.
and telling me about like 4 different categories of like sensory or just like
Mm.
regulation strategies that can go into these 4 categories of top down, bottom up, social, and dissociative. I don't really know which like theory that comes from. Like I don't
Okay.
know the textbook thing, but like for that top down could be listening to music or
Mhm.
like something from the brain outwards to the body like that. So like if you turn on your music and go for a walk kind of thing. The
Okay.
walking or swimming, cuddling someone, that is like bottom up, like from the body to the brain.
Mhm.
Mm.
Social would be your favorite person,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And favorite person, trusted people, or hopping onto a virtual like Discord call with friends.
Mhm.
That is a very common way a lot of my neurodivergence friends get their social fix, is
Mhm.
because they'd say in person, no, too many rules, too many different social, conscious, unconscious ways to conduct. But if it was a virtual space like an online game or like online chat group, then they can schedule and be the life of the party if it's
Mhm.
just the microphone and their headphones.
Mhm.
And then the
Mhm.
dissociative would be more things like drug use.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for explaining that. That's yeah,
Yeah.
that's interesting. Okay, so now I'm wanting to jump back again just
Yeah.
with a definition because neurodivergent,
Hmm.
obviously things fall under it is now what I'm under is what I'm hearing. So could we like what diagnoses fall on what does neurodivergent mean and what falls under that categorization? Does
Neuro
that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
so. And I don't know if I'm like the best person to answer this. My understanding of
Yeah.
neurodivergence is that it's anything that's not to the neurotypical brain.
Mhm.
So that's anything from autism, ADHD, OCD, someone with addictions, anything like that. Like anything where your brain
Mm.
is functioning differently from what we quote unquote see as the norm.
See, I
Things that
find
can
that
alter your learning structures,
Hmm.
like, isn't that almost I now this might be controversial for me to say, but isn't that all of us in one way? Like if we start to look at like people and experiences in life, like I would almost strongly state that we all experience trauma in our lives.
Hmm.
And and not all of and then maybe not to a great extent, but but many people to an extent that it actually changes the development of the brain. So this is where I agree and align that society actually needs to change their definition of what's neurotypical and maybe we're all neurodivergent and we just need to look at changing how things are set up and how things are accommodated. So I know that's kind of
Hmm.
so that's kind of where I start to have this
s-
questioning like
Well,
this
like the thing is from the teacher side
yeah.
of this, there's a lot of things in terms of like how we learn and learn differently that would be a
Mhm.
bit differently because like
Hmm.
you can go into like learning types, which is depending on there's more scientifically credible information on learning neurolinguistic programming that talks about like the people who are the kinesthetic learners, the auditory, the visual, stuff like that, where that's stuff that can be conditioned into someone based on certain sensory things that they experience. But more so what changes with the neurodivergent
Okay.
is it's certain things in terms of core functioning of the brain that is different. Like so executive functioning. Like when you need to do something,
Mhm.
like what is the process that you go through doing something?
Mhm.
Like
I don't like I think my brain works differently too. So
oh
I don't
yeah.
know. Like I
Yeah.
didn't do well in school and I
Mhm,
probably had attention problems in my own way.
mhm.
I don't have any diagnosis for that, but I had my own challenges. You asking me that is like, holy
Hold it.
crap, I have
Well,
no idea even what
yeah,
like I
that's
don't know. What's my
it's a loaded.
executive like
Yeah,
I don't know. It's a bit of like
yeah.
I don't know. So maybe that's to my point also that our brains all work so differently and then I want to respect and acknowledge that with autism and ADHD it's at this greater level and extent that becomes debilitating.
Yeah.
And when it becomes debilitating, the
Mhm.
importance and value and necessity of having a diagnosis is so important because it then creates a new pathway, a new understanding, a new acceptance of who we are as people is what I'm hearing. And so that is where I am understanding all of
Yeah.
this. But really, just
Mhm.
back to my point, and then all is that all our brains work differently. And I
Oh
get there's
yeah.
a maybe I
Mhm,
don't think it is a majority, is what I guess I'm
mhm.
arguing of people who work under a neurotypical way. That is my argument. Like I
Yeah.
would love to see a research project on that
But like
because
think
I
about
think
it in terms of society, like
yeah,
most people are not cishet white men.
yeah,
Most people are not, but
yeah,
those are the people that have the most power.
yeah.
So it's kind of like similar in terms of like thinking about neurotypes that
Mm,
way.
mhm,
And it also
mhm.
just has to do with fundamentally, again, like how you're wired. Like, yeah, I don't think like we like to think of things as spectrums, like to categorize things a lot.
Mhm.
Um, Something that I'll hear a lot, and I don't know if you've all heard it, but like I'll tell people like, oh yeah, I actually got an autism diagnosis. Like, oh well, Everyone's like a little autistic.
Mhm. I've heard that. Yeah.
Yeah. And to that, it's like, well, because it's a spectrum, like, so you can be like
Mhm.
a little bit autistic to a lot autistic. And it's like, no, no, no. It's a neurotype. Like, you are either 100% autistic or you are not autistic, but
Mhm.
the autistic experience can vary depending on your
Ah,
skill profile.
thank you for
Yeah.
clarifying that because that actually is sort of a new understanding for me about
Hmm.
the spectrum is that you're either artistic or not, and then the extent that you experience the I lacking the word, but the way you experience it is different,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's where
Yeah.
there's a
I want
And
spectrum.
to
Yeah.
also highlight how a lot of research historically has been with sample sizes that are Caucasian
And
male.
males,
very small
Yeah.
right?
too.
It's
Yeah.
going to
Mm.
be the undergrads in psychology programs who are trying to get research credits. And so they're already going to be
Yeah.
that's very
Biases.
specific
Yeah.
thing. And that's why people are noticing, oh, I think this is presenting differently in women because they have used this as the template for understanding and perceiving what autism behaviors can look like, right?
Exactly.
Mm.
And a lot of research will exclude people if they are mentally ill. So, for
Okay.
example, I went through undergrad and I had to do some of those research participation things too. But because I had been diagnosed with major depressive disorder, I was not allowed to participate in some of the studies because it was going to look like I was an outlier. They wanted to make sure they could control everything as much as possible. But as a result, that means a lot of neurodivergent
Yeah.
people or a lot of people who struggle with mental illness are not represented in the studies that we have. So how are we supposed to treat these people?
Mhm.
um, Also, just highlighting again, sorry, that like
Yes,
spectrum
sorry, thank you.
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
autism. I follow quite a few autistic individuals on social media that I've found very helpful. So one of them is NeuroWild. She's an SLP out of Australia, who's also autistic. But another one I follow, her name is Paige Lale, and she's autistic. And something that she said in terms of like that everyone's a bit autistic thing, I've kind of I latched onto this because I really liked it. It's like if someone says that, like, oh, everyone's a little autistic, it's like, oh, everyone's a little 6 feet tall.
Mm.
Everyone's a little blind.
Mm.
Because
Mhm.
that's not the case.
Mhm.
Everyone's like a little bit of an amputee.
Mhm.
Like that's
Mhm.
not how that works, and
Mm.
that's how we need to view
Mhm.
like these neurotypes too.
Mhm. Mhm.
So I don't know.
That makes a lot of sense to me. And
Mhm.
just to just clarify my point as you're saying that, I that makes sense to me, and I still sort of think that we need to move
Mm.
more to that we're all neurodivergent, and that's more the mainstream. Like I think there's less neurotypical people than there are neurodivergent. I don't know. I mean, maybe I need to do a
Well,
research because I have
well,
no data. I'm just saying, like, I think I'm seeing a lot more of that happening, and we're feeling like, what's going on? Well, it's because there's so much happening in our societies that's impacting how we're developing, and not in all neurodivergent diagnoses, but in some, it becomes an environmental impact that is the
it's very
cause.
much so because, like, you look at Alberta, we have a little bit of a higher normal than number, in terms of what is normal. But the thing is the idea is that we do have a higher incidence of persons who are classified as neurodivergent in Alberta,
Mm,
and
mhm,
then like beyond that, like there's a lot of things where right now I know something that you're very much well spoken towards, which is trauma,
mhm,
and one of the things that trauma can present as ADHD. And one of the things that for me as someone who has had the privilege of having an early diagnosis and
mhm,
understanding the elements of what is ADHD, being as read as I can be on the DSM with regards to it. The thing is a lot of the people who've entered the sphere of being ADHD influencers, which is like a whole other thing,
mhm,
most of them are talking about trauma. And I'm
mhm.
like, I've even
Yeah.
spoken to colleagues about like hey, that. I'm not out to lunch on this. And I'm
Mm,
like going to the research and stuff like that. And I'm like, no, these people are advocating about their trauma and their experience of it. And it's creating a lot of misinformation out
mm,
there,
mhm.
like
Mhm.
because, um,
What would you say the misinformation is? Can I
well,
ask from your
what
perspective?
it is
Mhm.
it's conflating other elements of mental health. So like
Okay, can you break that
someone
what
who
you mean
might
by
be
that?
talking about certain anxieties,
Mhm.
maybe they are speaking about autism, you know, something like that. But like, just even things like with sensory stuff, like for me, I can't exactly relate. Like I do get sensory overload, but for me, my overload comes from, so in terms of executive functioning. So instead of having this sensory feeling of pain from overstimulation, what I will get is I get almost the feeling of pain when it's like, I have to do this, but I'm not going to get a dopamine hit from this. This is pain. I can't do this. I need to submit my hours. I need to do this. And like pain. And I can't move past this. And that's like where that's the big difference in terms of it. So that there's those core functioning things that are quintessential to like what our experience is. And like, while there are neurodivergence that kind of like layer on top of that everyone relates to, those are some of those core functioning things that are really different. And so when it comes to like trauma, we talk about fight, flight, or flight and all those things. And so that's where it ends up mimicking that. And so we end up having people speaking about it, and they're not people who are truly experts on those different elements. Like a lot of what we talk about is part of our lived experience. There are certain things that we understand because we know that label. And again, that's, you know, there's the whole conversation on labels that people can get into. But the thing is it allows us to self-advocate. It allows us to kind of go there. And the problem is the misinformation that's out there is they'll advocate for the wrong things, where it's like someone will say, I don't want a phone call or something like that. Like literally for me, if I get a text from, say, you or John, and I see it, it literally goes to the top of my brain. It's a five alarm fire. I need to deal with this. Dopamine hit there. If I have no context, no contextual variables, I need additional context for me to put out that fire and be like, you know what? I need to deal with this later on. And like, because my brain is wired to deal with that immediacy. And so like in terms of it, it's like for different people where they'll do that. And that is very much the definition of ADHD. And like, then there are the different types of that. But the thing is for someone else who has that, like, you know, they'll like, there are the things it's like, you know, I don't want to do that because that doesn't feel good, you know, but the thing is like, it's to a different level. It's not something that there is that universally shared experience in all elements of it. It's like and so people will conflate trauma, anxiety, mental health, and then we get a lot of things where we can, you know, especially where we're pattern recognition, we'll be like, you know what, maybe try this strategy because it's worked for me. But it's like we can only advocate as best we can for ourselves and our own personal needs. Yeah. Sorry, that was threaded.
I think that's fine. I mean, it's actually kind
yeah.
of evoking a lot of emotion or feelings in me, only because I just not only, but one of the reasons is because I just read Scattered Minds by, I keep plugging Gabor. I'm a fan. And, you know, maybe I need to broaden what I'm reading, but I just read his Scattered Minds and it's all about ADHD. And I'm not sure if this is what you're speaking of, but from what he shares is that this is his perspective, his research presents it as a developmental disorder. And so that it comes from environmental stress or environmental, it comes from the environment. So I wonder if I guess a question to you, is that what we're seeing influencers present, like saying that with the trauma? Because to me, that's then connected to trauma. It's saying like the amount of stress or tension that may be in your environment or presented around you, whether it's in the womb or in your early years or whatever. It might not be, it doesn't have to be that it was explicitly in your face type of tension or stress. But if there was that being held in your environment, that has a great impact on the development of your brain. And then ADHD is one of the impacts of that. And then he goes on. So that's how I have understood it. But I also know you, and I guess I'm curious how you how that relates to you, or does it not?
Like in terms of it, it's, I think those are all things that, you know, the environmental stuff, that's stuff that I really don't it's where I grew up. It's stuff like
Yeah.
that. Like the genetic component, like my dad was 100% ADHD. On the other side of it, my mom may have had some neurodivergences, but very
Mhm.
mildly. But
Mhm.
now she's dealing with Parkinson's, she's basically
Mhm.
like no coping strategies, but now dealing with a dopamine deficit. So I'm like literally trying to give her strategies so
Yeah.
that it can help her executive functioning that she's now having compromised by a
Mhm.
neurodegenerative disease, which is like
Mm.
completely different. And I think one of the things, at least from the current understanding, is there is a genetic component to it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So like right now, genetically, we have the same genes, except we have different genetic expressions of it. It's like the
Mhm.
thing is everyone could technically have these genes in them,
Mhm.
but trauma, environment, and all those things could influence it. So it does
Amplify
speak
them.
to
Yeah, it can
could
amplify them.
could
Yeah.
could, could speak to that.
That
But
makes sense.
and
Yeah.
like and then you go to the sociological. There are, and I know John's shared his thoughts that he actually believes that autism might be on kind of an evolution of dealing with the sensory things that society's kind of gone on, and being able to just ignore some of the understanding the things that are useless in terms of sensory things. That's something he's had some like great
Mhm.
convos on.
Mhm.
But then on the other side of it, one of the things that you talk about ADHD is they were the hunter gatherers. They were the hunters who, because it's actually not inattentive.
Mhm.
It is actually an excess of attention.
Mhm.
That's
Mhm.
like the mind-blowing thing.
Mhm.
And so that's where the sensory thing is like, so of course, you have the sensory experience of that stress.
Mhm.
But like for me, I thrive in it. It's like, hey, my car was broken into last night. I'm making a plan.
Ready.
My buddy is like he's talking to me, and he's like, I can't understand how you, and I'm already 10 steps ahead. I'm already thinking about like who I'm calling, what's there. I'm trying to do mental unload and all this stuff. But the
Yeah.
thing is like my brain was like just feeding off that dopamine and stuff like
Mhm.
that.
Mhm.
It's like it's just a different core
Mhm.
wiring,
Mhm.
and definitely stuff, can attribute like trauma down the road.
Yeah.
We see
Yeah.
these people have
Yeah.
this,
Mhm.
eventually have it.
Mhm. Well, thanks for
Yeah. So
explaining that
yeah.
from your perspective. I
And now I
appreciate
need to
that.
go check on one of the cameras.
Oh, the acceptance is
Neurodivergent.
growing, right? Think
Mhm.
about
Sure.
10, 20 some
Yeah.
years ago where a diagnosis might be like, well, we're going to shutter you away to some like
Yeah.
boarding school and never bring
Yeah.
you into society ever again,
Yeah.
kind of
But
stuff.
that's what I'm saying.
And
There's
there's a
no
stigma.
neurotypical way that a brain works. Like,
It's a social construct. Like
Yes,
normalcy is a social
exactly.
construct.
Like
Thank you.
neurotypical
That's
is
that's the
what
neuro
contributes to
construct.
capitalism.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, well, I
exactly.
need to write that. That is what it is.
Normalcy is a
It's
social construct.
Hold
and-
on. That is
Yeah.
exactly what I
That's the
believe
point,
it
yeah.
is. That's the point I'm trying to make.
And that's where I
That-
think a lot of the trauma comes from, which is why we conflate the trauma with these other things so often, because it's almost hard to like extricate the trauma from that experience. And I think this also ties in with what you were saying before with like, well, we all have some of this going on. Like, why is this the way that it is? And if you look at society, like we have such a narrow focus, and we've all decided like, I mean, I fell into this pit. Like you have like the life that you go to school, you do well, you get like your partner, whatever, you go to university, you graduate, you get married, you get a house, you get a job. I did all of those things. I hit the steps that you're supposed to. Because autistic rule follower, I'm like, you give me a plan? Awesome. Those are the rules for life. I'm going to follow it. That's great. That's going to give me a good life. And then I did all of those things. And then I was not happy.
Mhm.
I was not satisfied. And then I was left with, okay, I did it. What now?
Mhm. Mhm.
Because we don't have a script for the rest of our life. And the way that we have structured education is so narrowly focused. And talking about how there are different learners, the reality is that we will all learn best if we have the ability to learn in different modalities always present to us. So we can choose to interact with our learning in different ways depending on how we're feeling, or in multiple modalities. Um, and so, like, that's, I feel like, the work that we're doing, or the work that
Yes.
we're trying to do. That's why I feel like I became accidentally who I needed as a child in terms of advocating
Mhm.
for online spaces for learning. Like,
Mhm.
like
Can you say that again? That's why you accidentally
I
became.
accidentally became who I needed as a
I feel
child.
like you on purpose became. I don't want to impose my, but I
Yeah.
feel like you are so on purpose, Kat. Like who in my,
Mhm.
just how I see you, and Kat's relatively new to Key Creative, but just the person you are is so authentic and true and valuable and important in the work that we do, and such an an awesome, amazing, surprising, beautiful, powerful example of neurodivergence, and advocating for our children, that it just feels like I can't think of anything else but you are so on purpose. But I don't want to take away from your experience, obviously, and how it
Yeah.
felt for you. But I see you as such an on purpose person. But I want to honor that
Yeah.
obviously you struggled,
I
and
think
that makes it hard to sort of see the purpose behind that. So I say that
yeah.
very respectfully and in honoring that as well.
I think I say accidentally because it's like people always, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Mm,
I never knew. Never knew.
mm,
I mean, when I was really little, it's like, oh, I want to be like a fighter pilot or a princess or a pop star because
yeah,
that's like the thing.
that's
But
the
as I
thing.
got older, it's like, I have no idea. I have no idea. And
Mhm.
people kept telling me, you can do anything because you're so smart. And I was just like, I have no idea. I
Yeah.
have no idea how to focus my interest. I have no idea what to do.
Mm,
And so like I feel like I really kind of accidentally fell into this. And then the
mm.
more that I think about it, I'm like, this all makes
It
sense.
all makes so much sense because
Yeah.
at like this is why I love Key Creative. And I'll say that so proudly and make no other comment except that I'm proud of Key Creative because it's all about just celebrating people for who they are, where they're at, how they learn, how they do things, whatever neurodivergent way their brain may function or typical way,
Yeah.
like everyone is worth celebrating. And we see value in every person and believe that every person has the ability to create their awesomeness or share their strengths and talents. And there's ways that we can support them in doing that.
Yep.
Well, I'll say this, like one of the reasons I'm one of the lifers here is the fact that like
Yes.
and no, like end of the day when it comes down to it, like if someone who lived the experience of going through the system and
Mhm.
lived kind of like even before where we're at now with disability advocacy and like the stress and like this, the mental health challenges it caused for my mom and battling
Mm.
the system just to advocate for my needs. And like, they've standardized certain things. We still respect the individual.
Yeah.
That celebrating of someone who's awesome. I think of Jet, like
Mhm.
where John goes in and says, he's awesome.
Mhm.
And his mom talks about it, about
Mhm.
how he is
He is
awesome.
awesome.
And if you
And
don't know what we're talking about,
Yeah.
go to our website, go to our testimonials page, and we have this 5-part video series of a long graduated client of ours named Jed.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know what? It was filmed so many so many years ago now, but it is the truth of like what we do. Like
Yeah.
and the way that family was able to shift and celebrate their son is just a testimony to what we do. Yeah.
Because the thing is like, again, we'll go to the neurotypical, like so much shame is kind of pushed upon the
Mhm.
persons in the disability community that you
Mhm.
have to obscure, you have to kind of, you
Mhm.
have to mask to be like everyone else.
Mhm.
When the reality is you're your own awesome self,
Yeah.
and you're going to find those things that do support you. And you know, we want to support the individual. We want to give them that whole strategy.
Mhm.
Like I say, we're not the ones who are coming in to fix your kid like a car.
Mhm.
That's not what our job is. Like,
Mhm.
if you want clinicians who are going to just do that, we're going to respect the individual that you are.
Mhm.
And that's going to be something that's going to be the real difference maker, because
Mhm.
those were the people who made real impact.
Mhm.
The people who looked at the person that I was, because if I'd gone through the system, they'd been like, oh yeah, Mike's like smart, like he's doing well. It wasn't well for me, just similar to you, the math experience, to kind of dial it back to that. I was an IB math student, grade 10. I retook my 31 because I wasn't happy with my mark. I
Mhm.
retook the whole course.
Mhm.
And then I ended up dealing with a teacher who was an absolute arse with like his ability, his beliefs in terms of disability.
Mm,
And like and the actual emotional abuse that revisited
mm,
trauma that I had experienced when I was even younger,
mhm.
as someone who had to deal with like the advocacy. It was there's just so much stuff of like, you know, what's typical, what's not. It's like, no, there's individuals. There
Mhm.
really are these individuals, and if we can respect that,
Mhm.
that's where we can give them that opportunity to thrive.
Yeah.
I've
Thank you
I've
for
got
sharing,
sorry,
Mike.
thank you for sharing that because I've got
Mhm.
my amazing great aunt in my head right now. Her
Mhm.
name is Janice Crawley, and her first career was an occupational therapist, a big influence
Mm.
to why I'm here today. But she was born in like 1935,
Mm.
and back then her left-handedness was different and stigmatized. And her father, this great grandparent I will never know, was the principal of their school. And he would be damned to have his left handed daughter cause so much of a difference in classrooms. So
Wow.
in her 20s at McGill, she was known for being an amazing ambidextrous tennis player. But
Yeah.
that's because in the school environment, she had to learn. She was forced to learn
Wow.
everything right-handed and have her left hand tied behind her back until she could write with her right hand like everybody else,
Mm.
Mm.
right?
Wow.
And so that for me is when like Mike saying that we're not going to fix your kids like a car is so huge to me because
Mm.
if I'm trying to do a parallel there, it's almost like I guess it almost historically masking and presentation is the objective, not actually helping at the core of or accommodating or stability. It was all about masking and presentation because that's how I feel with my aunt having to be forced to learn right-handedness
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
is presentation and masking.
Wow. Thank you
Yeah.
both for sharing
Mhm.
that. So, Kat, now, like with
Mhm.
all of that in mind, like the thing that's coming into my mind is how has this all now, like who you are, how does who you are impact the work you do with our clients?
That's such a good question. It's because we were just talking about masking. Like, as
Yeah.
much as masking has a very high emotional toll and like a very high like energy requirement, I feel like my ability to mask is one of the things that helps me succeed a lot
Mhm.
in my work because I am really able to kind of like almost chameleon.
Mhm.
And for a long time, I felt like that was me being manipulative.
Mm.
And I had to like really get that negative connotation out of my head because I'm not trying to actively do it. I'm not trying to like weasel my way into things.
Mm-mm.
But like I feel like my ability to match somebody else's energy level and to kind of meet them where they're at is pretty great in terms of like being a therapist and getting into somebody's homes and being able to like relate to the parents and also
Mhm.
being able to be what the kid needs in the moment. Because I
Mhm.
have kids where they are like so sensory seeking, you need to be big and out there and silly and like not afraid to like just be ugly in a way. Be ugly, be like big,
I
be
love
whatever.
that. I love how
Um
you presented that word in such a like beautiful way.
Yeah,
I
but it's
love
true,
that.
like, I feel like especially as women, like, we're
Yeah.
so concerned always about how we look,
Yeah.
and but
Yeah.
it's like, you have to just be big, be everything, right? And then I
Yeah.
have clients who's like, if I were to do that, they'd be like, "Whoa, who are you?" Like, "I can't be around you right now, you're too much." So for those clients, I'm much more just like that calm person who can just
Mm.
be there. So I
Mhm.
feel like that's helped me.
Mhm.
I feel like, again, my pattern recognition and just being through some of those experiences, I wouldn't say that I always get it right. Like, I'm not, I don't have that kind of hubris, but I feel like I'm more able than some people um, to consider the multifaceted things that are going on in a situation and to consider all of the context and like maybe that's happening because this, or this. So I can at least come up with a couple of reasons why something might be happening so that
Mhm.
we can like come up with a discussion point or like
Mhm.
figure out what's actually really like underlying these challenges that we're seeing.
Mhm.
So that can be helpful in helping to shift perspectives because
Mhm.
oftentimes if I like have a parent who's like with a kid who's like, oh, well, he just does this because of this. I'm like, oh, but what if it's because he's actually really uncomfortable and they're like, oh, well, if I just say no sternly, like he'll listen. I'm like, yeah, sure, he's listening. That's fine. But like, maybe the kiddo's still really uncomfortable and he's just listening because he doesn't want to make you upset.
Yeah.
And so being able to shift that perspective is I think a pretty big thing for me. Yeah.
Hmm. And I kind of want to go ask a little bit more about that. So then, so you've talked about the benefits of masking for you as a clinician in your practice. So so it's worked for you in that way. When is it maybe not
That's a
useful?
very good question too.
Right? Because I
Yes.
get like it's served you, but and and you can teach that and help your clients know the value of that. But when is it like a fine line of then it's not authentic and now it's not true to who you are and there isn't value in it?
I would say I'm very much, Mike has alluded to before, like the fight, flight, or freeze response. There's also that fawn that people
Mm-hmm.
aren't really as familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
I am definitely a fawner, which is
Mm.
part of why I didn't get, I would say, caught or diagnosed along the way, because that means I'm more likely to just appease everyone around me. I'm very
Mm-hmm.
much a people pleaser. I will say yes to things, even when I shouldn't. So
Mm.
I will take more energy out of myself in order to help other people, as opposed to taking care of myself.
Mm.
So I can lose myself pretty easily in that
Mm-hmm.
sense and start
Mm-hmm.
doing things just for other people.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that can get tricky.
Mm-hmm.
That can get
Mm-hmm.
tricky, especially as I transition away from like a work mentality to
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, now what do I want to do? What's fun
Mm-hmm.
for me? Sometimes I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I feel like I do have some empathy with some of our kiddos, where it's like they're so dysregulated because they have no idea what to do with themselves. And I am
Yeah.
like that at home sometimes. I will like sit there, I will spin out. I will just like, ah, I will like lay
Mm-hmm.
on the floor. I will be like, I don't know what to do. Like I just will like lose it almost. And I
Mm-hmm.
will like go down a depressive rabbit hole. Like I benefit from having options given to me,
Mm-hmm.
just like our kids do. And I benefit from having things visually available to me
Mm-hmm.
because object permanence is a struggle. Object permanence just sucks with ADHD. Like I
Yeah.
will forget that I have food in my fridge or
Mm.
cupboards
Mhm.
when it's closed.
Mhm.
Um,
Don't tell the environmentalists we well, I guess we're contributing to the greenhouse gases with how much the food rots in our and composting, but it's like, yeah, food does not survive our fridges.
yeah, no,
They don't.
it doesn't. No. But yeah, I would say like the masking, the most detrimental thing it's done to me has been like just a lot of that fawning, a lot of losing myself, a lot of living for other people. And
Mhm.
that was most prevalent when I was, as I alluded to before, like trying to follow those societal beats that you're supposed to like hit. Like you're
Mhm.
supposed to do this, you're supposed to do this, get married, have a house.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
and I did those, and there's like
Mhm.
I actually didn't like need any of that. I didn't want any of that. And so
Mhm.
it's kind of weird to be learning more about myself and who I am just in later life, because it's like I spent the first 20 or so years of my life just almost like this in this petrified little box, like unsure of what to do and just trying desperately to please everyone around me so that I could just like exist.
Mm. Mhm.
Yeah.
So what would you say to the parents or to the caregivers or the teachers or the people supporting children who are neurodivergent? I have such a hard time saying that word.
It's a big word.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a big word.
Honestly, just love. Unconditional love
Mm.
is the biggest thing, and that's what I've been able to find through my favorite people, and
Mm.
even though they've changed over the years and that's been hard, like I'm privileged to be able to have those people in my life.
Mhm.
Um, I would say also like just be open to life looking different than what
Mm.
you expected it to be,
Yeah.
because I feel like that's where you can find true happiness, and that's where you'll find something that like just makes life worth living, that makes like it just makes everything so much easier when you're not confined to a box.
Yeah, totally.
um
Mm.
but yeah, just let things look different, let things be different. Your relationships don't all have to look the same, like school doesn't have to look the same. um I started to flourish more socially a lot once I'm privileged to be living in the time that I am because the internet's available.
Mhm.
I like really honed my social skills through instant messaging online. That's where I got most of my socialization. And I'd say that's still where I get a lot of it. Like you were saying, Deanna, your friends will hang out in Discord and chat. That's what I do with my friends
Yeah.
too.
Oh my gosh, we're just co-regulating online all the time. Or we'll
Yeah.
do a voice channel where it's just typing sounds. It's body doubling.
Yes.
Kind of. But that's what
Yeah.
we'll do. I just need the sound of someone else's keyboard clacking and we're not necessarily engaging with each other. And
Exactly.
that's like kind of veering almost into like parallel play is another thing. Like, oh my gosh, doing different things with different people in the same room.
Yep.
Mind blowing.
Yep.
For
Oh,
productivity.
I do that with my friends. We'll each like get online on Discord and we'll share our screens. It's like, I'm playing this game. You can watch me do this. I'll watch you sometimes play your game.
Do you know
To-
how that I think naturally happens also is at the coffee? I'm thinking for myself, I'm so fascinated. I've never sort of thought of that as an option, but I probably do that at the I think of why I go to the coffee shop. It's for
Yeah,
the
I did
parallel
that.
play. Yeah.
I'm finding it's funny that we're at, there's a measure of you got to be secure with these chatting things for kids and stuff like that. But like for the parallel play but I'm like thinking to myself, this is exactly where I did the same thing, except for me, it was a telnet window playing a mud online or going and I was literally a moderator in the ECS, like a student moderator of the ECS first class BBSs. That's where you had to dial into a separate network, not just dialing into the internet when you had to do that back in the day, kiddos. But like we would spend time on that. And now I just live with like 1,000 Messenger and WhatsApp groups of mostly neurodivergent people. Yes, you know who you are. That we're all co-regulating that safe, parallel environment, right?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I have one other thing I wanted to just interject for the parents. This is like just one of the things I think it's really thing you have to kind of get over is your ego. It's an ego blow. You have a child who is not what the society has an expectation on. And like I have had the apology from my parents for it because they're informed. But you're feeling guilt. You're feeling the mourn and loss of function that the kid didn't even know. Your ego doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It does not matter. What matters is supporting your child where they're at. And as soon as you can get over that, I've seen it with like Hanon groups when we stop focusing on speech and we just focus on the communication. And then I'm not saying this happens for everyone. It just happens. But those stressors and those things that parents push onto to their kids with this, it's the same with the kid who's stressing about their grades. As soon as you can get over that ego earnestly, you're going to see a major difference.
Now, let me just say, because I just want to align with the people that the ego's coming in hard and it makes it hard to do that. That's okay.
Yeah.
I would, and I've done it for myself in different, like, get help, find
Yes.
support, reach out to a therapist, talk to someone. It's okay that you're feeling the way you're feeling. You've had a loss. Right? There might be that you have created. That's where the ego comes in, that you have expected.
It's like,
and so there are places you can go to get support, to share how you feel, to process that emotion, that feeling, those thoughts. And so reach out to a community, to a therapist, to someone, so that you can then show up for your child the way they need you to show up.
and you just as much need to have someone who can meet you where you're at.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it's not going to be something that you fix overnight.
No.
It's a lifelong experience.
You're in it together.
Exactly.
And that's kind of what I'd say some of our coaching visits are like too. So I've said that before, where our visits are not just me taking your child to the kitchen, or if they're here to like a basic room and doing rote exercises for 90 minutes and then I give you a worksheet and then I leave. Like we want to collaborate as a family and coach you as a family too. And not just like it kind of just, open the box too for what therapy looks like in this day and age, right?
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah. Any
Yeah.
final comments, Kat? Anything else you want to
Final comment.
share, say?
I don't know.
Okay, that's okay. This has been such a, for me, just, I'm very grateful for the conversation. And I'm very grateful for the space to have this conversation, just myself and learning together and giving
Mhm.
me the opportunity to, I guess, ask questions and say bold statements and things. And I think I love that. That's again another reason why I love Key Creative is
Yeah.
that we allow ourselves and we each allow each other the space to be
Yeah.
ourselves, right? And that we're all learning and growing, right?
Oh, I would say, just on the point of you saying like find support and stuff in terms of
Mm-hmm.
parents, like something that has been hugely impactful for me has been finding therapists that are
Mm-hmm.
also neurodivergent or who
Mm-hmm.
have similar profiles to me, because then it's like the lens for me has shifted from, oh, you struggle with this and like we need to fix it, like this is a you problem, to like, yeah, that sucks. And it like it totally like makes
Mm-hmm.
sense why you struggle with this.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also almost expected that you will struggle with this. But
Mm-hmm.
here's kind of what we can do to try to mitigate that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's more of that
Mm-hmm.
understanding approach instead
Mm-hmm.
of just like therapy is meant to go fix you. It's like, no, like you like society is broken.
Yeah.
And that's what sucks.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
like acknowledgement that it's difficult to exist in it sometimes, but here is like, I'm here to understand you regardless. And here are the things we can do
Yeah.
within this
Thank you
structure
for
that we
Thank
have.
sharing that.
you.
And I'm
Yeah.
just thinking of our acronym, WHOOSH, we open opportunities, serving hope, that there is hope. And I see a shift. Even in this conversation, we're creating a shift in our society and in those online platforms where you're connecting with people, we're creating hope, we're creating a shift. So, like there's so many things that, yes, are contributing to sort of maybe not the empowerment of people, but there are some really great people doing some pretty awesome things, and I think we're some of them here, and so I'm grateful for that. Thank you all for being a part
Yeah.
of this.
And so the whoosh is not just our acronym, but it's also our like handshake.
Yeah.
As we debrief, as we wind things down.
Yes.
Yeah, and
Well-
Cat knows our whoosh, right?
Yeah,
Cat
I
knows
do.
our whoosh.
Okay,
I do.
of course
Yeah,
we do.
yeah. Oh,
Okay,
yeah.
is
You wanna whoosh
everybody
it out?
ready?
We're whooshing it out.
Yeah, so again, fists in to start. Everybody ready? 3, 2, 1.
Whoosh.
Key Talks is a project of Key Creative. Our co-hosts are Paula Audrey Rivero and Deanna Halls. Our production team is Michael Schwake, Jessa Dupuis, and Deanna Halls. Music by John Rivero. To reach out to us or access services for you or your family, visit keycreative.com. That's QICreative.com and fill out our online intake form. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you next time.